Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to Macduff Lives, and happy October. It's the 1st of October, 2024, and very, very happy to welcome in the month with our good friend Harley Schlanger. Harley, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, John. A lot of things going on.
Too much, too much. I've been, spending 12 hours on the internet just trying to catch up with this and that and the other thing. The big thing over in my world, of course, is the horrible Hurricane Helene and the devastation that we still haven't seen. I don't think we've seen a tenth of it yet. And the response of the government has been very, very slow and sluggish. And the people of that area, hundreds and hundreds of square miles are just devastated. So that's been the big thing that's bugging me. I'm still not, I don't think I have any particular personal friends that have got caught or suffered there, but this is an unusual event to say the least, both in the direction of the storm and the magnitude of the storm. So much so that I personally would not be surprised to find it had been manipulated to cause damage to these particular areas.
Well, minimally, the other point, which I think is important, is that with all this talk about global warming and once in 100-year storms and things of that sort, why is there no money spent on upgrading the infrastructure? Dredging rivers, constructing dams. I mean, we used to know how to handle some of these things. And now we've seen from what happened in New York a couple of years ago, what happened in New Orleans, what was it, 2005, that the infrastructure that had been built is old and decaying. Same thing in Europe. There was a big flood in Czech Republic and Serbia, Slovakia, a number of people killed. And so here you have all these billions being spent supposedly to deal with climate change. And one wonders where it's going. It's going into these damn windmills that don't do a thing for the electrical production. So it just shows we have an establishment which is brain dead. And the problem is that they have enough power that they can make the rest of us brain dead. So we're victims of their bad planning and their bad intentions. And I've been spending the last couple of days, while you were looking at what you were looking at, I've been looking into this whole UN General Assembly meeting and what's going on around it. And what's clear is there's a huge gap between what the global South wants and what the remnants of the unipolar order intend to do. Big gap. And it's getting to the point of an explosion. And we see this explosion in what's going on in Southwest Asia right now with Israel. Killing with impunity, just basically saying they're going to go in and invade Lebanon and no one can say anything about it. We see this also with Zelensky and his buddy, his frontman, Blinken, running around saying, we're going to get Biden to change his mind on these missiles. These are suicidal actions. And so one of the things I'm working on is putting together a dossier on who is Blinken, where does he come from? Because at this point, he's the person with hands-on running the U.S. foreign policy. We know Biden isn't doing it. The Defense Department actually did step in, it looks like, and convince Biden not to give Zelensky the go-ahead to fire missiles into Russia. But how long will that last? There's the short-term reprieve. So these are some of the, when you say there's a lot going on, it's somewhat overwhelming. But if you put it together, what you can see is that we're coming to a battle between the global South and the BRICS and Russia and China on the one side, and the collapsing empire of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the vassals they have in Europe on the other. And the big question in my mind, and what I'm working on, is can I get the vassals to rebel? Because if Germany, for example, broke from NATO, broke from the European Union, this would have enormous implications for what would happen in the future. So that's what I'm concentrating on right now.
Germany break from NATO? Are you serious? How could they do that? I think it's almost, in their DNA that they're part of NATO. That's just the way it looks to me. And then all of the arrangements made to control their society and their economy and their government from World War II. That's not over, is it?
Oh, no, it's not over at all, but it's not working. The people of Germany are paying a bad price for it. Look, let me just tell you that tomorrow, Wednesday, October 2nd at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to have a forum on Germany needs a new strategic architecture. And it's going to be featuring Jack Matlock, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, who's going to talk about this whole question of what is the intention of Russia. And he's going to ridicule this idea that Russia is a military threat to Europe. He's going to go through the idea that disprove that the special military operation was unprovoked. He's going to go through what actually happened when the discussion of NATO came up and Baker, Bush, Helmut Kohl, and others promised the Russians there would be no eastward expansion. So Matlock's going to speak. Then Ted Postol, who's one of the leading experts on nuclear weapons, MIT, Defense Department. He just helped design the whole program. He's going to talk about the idiocy of putting long-range nuclear-capable missiles in Germany. And that's what Biden told Schultz the Germans have to do by 2026. Then we have a French military expert and a German military expert, and Helga will be speaking. So if any of your viewers want to see this, go to theschillerinstitute.com and you can find a link, an invitation for the event tomorrow, Wednesday the 2nd at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And when you ask the question about what's going to happen with Germany, look, the Schultz coalition government has collapsed. The Greens are practically on their way out of the government, and they're splitting. A number of the younger members of the Green Party just left. The two top executives of the Green Party resigned after the results of these 3 state elections. Habeck and Baerbock, the 2 leading Greens who are left, they're squabbling over who should be the chancellor candidate. Baerbock stepped aside for Habeck, but Habeck may be talking about setting up a new political party. That's not going to go anywhere because he's such an idiot. Then the Free Democrats, the liberals, are out, and Schultz's party has collapsed. And in the vacuum, what's emerging is the old left group around Sarah Wagenknecht and the Alternative for Deutschland, which is labeled extreme right wing. And as one of their members of parliament said in an interview with me the other day, does extreme right wing mean we want to end war? Does extreme right wing mean we want peace with Russia and China? Because if it does, then I guess we're extreme right wing. So there's a shift going on. Also, John, just Sunday in Austria, the FPÖ, the Freedom Party of Austria, came in first in the national election. They can't form a coalition because no one will work with them. But the people are turning against these governments. And, I think we're about to see an upheaval, especially if they reinstate the draft and raise taxes for military while the infrastructure is going to hell in Europe. So, I think it's going to be a very turbulent time. It's going to be a transition period that will, buckle up and be prepared for a rough ride. But the question is, are there enough people in the West who have the sense to recognize that the idea of a nuclear war with Russia is not a good one? The idea that you're betting that Putin is bluffing is not a good one. The idea that you think Netanyahu is going to stop killing once he kills Palestinians and people in Lebanon, that's not a good bet. The idea that NATO can take over in case Trump gets elected, that Europe can set up its own defense capability, that's not a winning proposition. The idea that we can go head-to-head with China in the Pacific in a war, and that we should even be thinking about that, that's where we are in the world. And it's really The problem is that we've become so foolish and illusional in the West that we allow these arrogant egotists like Anthony Blinken to run the policy. And Blinken's pedigree is protege of Madeleine Albright and Zbigniew Brzezinski, two certifiable war criminals. So why do we allow him to keep running things?
Yeah, let me read this from Wikipedia. It's his Wikipedia article, and I learned a lot from this little paragraph. Blinken was born on April 16th, 1962 in Yonkers, New York, to Jewish parents. His mother was Judith née Frame Blinken, and his father was Donald M. Blinken, a co-founder of the private equity firm Warburg Pincus, who later served as the U.S. ambassador to Hungary. His maternal grandparents were Hungarian Jews. Blinken's uncle, Alan Blinken, served as the U.S. ambassador to Belgium. His paternal grandfather, Maurice Henry Blinken, was an early backer of Israel who studied its economic viability, and his great-grandfather was Meyer Blinken, a Yiddish writer. Blinken attended the Dalton School. Those of us who know what the Dalton School is must shudder when we see that. In New York City until 1971. He then moved to Paris with his mother and Samuel Pisar. His mother married Pisar after divorcing Donald Blinken. And then it goes on with some anecdotes. So he attended Harvard. He was a co-editor of the Crimson, and then went to, guess where for his law degree? Columbia, and practiced law in New York City and Paris. Undergraduate thesis gave him an opportunity to interview Henry Kissinger. And now we find that he's just been going up the ladder for his whole career, up to the top of foreign policy, the Secretary of State. What does his background tell us about, who he really is, and why he's in this position, and whether his Jewish, or I will go ahead and say apparently Zionist background may be tinging our foreign policy in favor of the Zionist political movement?
Let me give you a couple more facts. Samuel Pisar was the attorney for Robert Maxwell.
Yeah.
And Maxwell was an MI6 Mossad CIA agent. And he was probably killed, flipped off his boat. We know his daughter is part of the Epstein family. On his father's side, his father Blinken worked with the Rothko Foundation. Now, Mark Rothko was this psychotic artist who killed himself, whose art was promoted by none other than Dominique de Menil, who's the heiress to the Schlumberger family. Schlumberger is the world's largest oil field services company. But Schlumberger was involved with George H.W. Bush in the late 50s in the CIA operations launched against Castro. Schlumberger also worked closely with Dick Cheney and Halliburton. This is a combination of a European oligarchic family. It's, the Jewish side is one side of it, but it's also the oligarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Pisar goes back to, the de Menil, Schlumberger de Menil goes back to the 16th century, the French oligarchy. And the John de Menil, the husband of Dominique Schlumberger de Menil, was involved in getting Lee Harvey Oswald the job at the Texas Book Depository building. So when you start peeling the onion, what do you find? This is what the deep state is. People who think the deep state are a bunch of Satanists plotting inside the Defense Department or the Justice Department to do harm to the country. Yeah, those are the little elves that do the work. But at the top is this oligarchy, an oligarchy which is hateful towards human beings and which thinks they're entitled by their birthright, by their breeding, to run the world. And they're not only arrogant, but they're silly. They're foolish because they make mistakes. And that's what we see now with Blinken. He's put the United States in a two-front war. Now, given what we know about Biden, that whether it's senility, dementia, whatever it is, Biden's not making the decisions. Blinken is part of the team that is making the decisions. And who's he making the decisions on behalf of? This City of London, Wall Street oligarchy, which is in a life and death struggle to stop the emergence of a new financial architecture based on economic development. And that's what played out at the United Nations General Assembly. I don't know if you had a chance to watch much of it, John, but when Netanyahu spoke, the place emptied out.
That's the part I saw. I just saw that on my Twitter feed, and I said, "Well done."
Yeah.
I wouldn't be listening to him for a moment.
But what did he say? He said the UN is an anti-Semitic swamp. He said that Iran, you should know, our long arm can reach you wherever you are. If the UN is serious as a committed to peace, how do you let a piece of crap like this guy give that kind of threat that he's going to launch World War III? And by the way, right before he gave the speech, he gave the orders to go with the ground invasion into Lebanon. So, whether you like Nasrallah or not, Hezbollah isn't the point. The point is he's coming to the UN and saying, we're going to do whatever we want to do. And who's facilitating that? Biden, under the influence of Blinken. Biden said, we need a ceasefire in Lebanon. Well, we've been saying that for how long in Gaza? And instead of a ceasefire, what do we get? A new war. And ultimately, and this is the danger, and this is something people should take seriously, the danger is that Netanyahu will do what he says, which is he will go after a war with Iran. And Netanyahu is bolstered by the fact that the polls in Israel show that he's now popular again because he's fighting Hezbollah and he killed Nasrallah, and they're continuing to kill people in Gaza that carry out an ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians. So on that kind of high, he's going to target Iran. Now, Iran, what will Iran do? What if they decide to fight? Well, Netanyahu is counting on the fact that Blinken will get Biden to back the Israelis, if necessary, with all kinds of firepower, possibly even nuclear cruise missiles and so on. So this is extremely dangerous, and it comes from this worldview that we can do whatever we want and you can't stop us. And Netanyahu has just proven that. No one has tried to stop him. And that's where we are in the world.
Well, I ran across the idea of a breakaway ally in some of the EIR articles I read over the past weekend, and I decided to look for the source of it, and I think it is a 1977 publication by Lyndon LaRouche, in which he's talking about Ariel Sharon and the invasion of Lebanon and the events of that era, in which he launches the concept of a breakaway ally as a kind of an act, as a kind of a play for the world to absorb. And what it was that, hey, Sharon is acting like he's going rogue. He said, I'm going crazy. I'm going rogue. I'm going to do all these terrible, terrible things, and nobody can stop me. And so the powers of the world just throw up their hands and say, "Oh, he's gone rogue. What can we do?" Is that not the same thing that's happening with Netanyahu? Netanyahu doesn't have the power to do these things on his own, and so is he not just another finger puppet of the existing elite?
Really important point, John. The many people think that Israel runs the United States, and that wealthy Jews who own Israel are the ones running U.S. policy. Well, in reality, who wants a war in the Middle East right now? I mean, Netanyahu does, but whether he benefits from it or not isn't the issue. The people who will benefit from it is the damage it will do to the potential for the global South and for the BRICS and the Russians and Chinese to pull together a new security architecture. And that's why it's being run. And the breakaway ally scenario was crafted around the idea of Sharon as a rogue operative, as he certainly was, but a rogue operative doing things that the US military and the US establishment wanted done. They wanted to break apart any potential for an alliance of Arab nations. And so what you had after the 73 war, the 1973 Arab-Israeli war, was you had Kissinger made a deal with the Saudis, the so-called petrodollar deal, that will let OPEC raise the prices and cut off oil and create a pool of liquidity. And where will that pool of liquidity go? Some of it will go to the sheikhs who run these countries. But all that's left over will go into the Western banks as a slush fund. That's what the petrodollar operation was. Some of it just direct in deposits and purchase of treasuries, some of it in purchase of weapons. That was Kissinger's deal. And it was from that Lynn looked at this situation with Sharon and said, these fools in the West want a new war in the Middle East. And they want it because they're very worried about whether the potential of the non-aligned movement will be reborn, which was starting to happen around people like Indira Gandhi, Ali Bhutto of Pakistan. And this is what LaRouche was pushing for. For these developing sector countries to use the debt as a weapon against the banks instead of letting the banks pummel them over the debt that they owed. That was the fight in the late 70s with LaRouche's International Development Bank. And so in looking at how this fight was shaping, he said, who's pushing the narrative here? It's coming from Kissinger. Now, Kissinger was not the greatest Superman. Kissinger was an operative of, on the one hand, the Rockefeller interests, but more importantly, as he himself admitted in a May 1982 speech at Chatham House, the Center of British Intelligence, he said he was working from British intelligence documents when he was Secretary of State, and that the special relationship was the key to his policy. So Kissinger admitted it. So if you take that, then you go back and say, okay, well, where did this come from? The Balfour Declaration. It came from the British manipulation of the situation in the Middle East from the beginning of the 20th century. The carving up of the national territories, what tribe became owner of the land where the oil was found, and so on. So this is all manipulated. And the problem is that on the one side, you had desperate Jews who escaped Europe after the Holocaust, who were not allowed in large parts to go to the United States or to European countries. They were basically, over 1 million of them were shipped to Israel. And they were told, you're Zionists, this is your land, God gave this to you, you have to take it. And in the West, the fundamentalist Christians were told, hallelujah, this is what we need to bring back Jesus, have a new Armageddon, Battle of Armageddon. So it was manipulation all the way around. And that's why if people understand things like the breakaway ally scenario, they won't fall for the stupid explanations that most people fall for, that a bunch of rich Jews own the United States and can do whatever they want. It's much more complex than that, and it has to do with how an oligarchy has survived for 500 years. This moment where we're seeing the end of the empire, this empire goes back to the beginnings of the European colonial expeditions, the end of the 1400s and the beginning of the 1500s. And that's what's coming to an end now, because the people in the developing sector are saying, enough, we're not accepting this anymore. And the people who run the colonies are saying, no, you have to accept it, you have no alternative. That's the fight.
Vasco da Gama.
Yeah.
Ponce de Leon is pounced.
From Vasco da Gama to Ariel Sharon.
And uh, I wanted to get back to Germany because I do have this one question that I was trying to hang on to. Um, the effort by the U.S. and the State Department after World War II and the Marshall Plan, uh, you know, the rejection of the Morgenthau Plan and the imposition of all of these CIA programs, what for Cultural Freedom Foundation or whatever it is, and then
Congress of Cultural Freedom.
Congress of Cultural Freedom and the Frankfurt School, and the whole idea that the German personality, the German essence of who is a German, has to be broken down and completely rebuilt. And as a result of that, the German people have been kind of taken out of the front row in terms of thinking and reasoning and doing things based on reason, and gone introspective and intentionally taken out of their usually active role in Europe. And now, having achieved that largely, the whole powers that be are now saying, no, we're going to have a draft. We're going to build up the army. We got a big war coming up. We're going to have to get ready. How's that going? Are people really willing to take up the arms, take up the sword, break the plowshares and beat them into swords again?
You know why that worked? Because the element of the Marshall Plan that did work was the creation of an American system-style Hamiltonian credit system, which allowed for the reindustrialization of Germany during the 1950s under Konrad Adenauer. So even though you had the British coming in with the CCF and the Frankfurt School and the collective guilt and everything else, at the same time, they took advantage of German science and German culture, which still existed, and the tradition of German engineering, and generated credit for it, and produced an economic miracle that gave the German people a very comfortable standard of living. And at the same time, they provided NATO as the protection against the probability that they were told that the Soviets are going to come in and rape your wives and children and take over the country. So Germany had a certain kind of tension in it based on the Cold War, but at the same time, they had benefits from the success of the economic policy. And people today who say, well, the Marshall Plan was a fraud. I mean, it wasn't the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Germany. It was the capital generated from the Marshall Plan as credit for industry, which was an example of LaRouche's idea of physical economy. That's what built up Germany. And that's what also, because of the German economic engine, led to Europe having an improved standard of living. Now, at a certain point, this became a threat to the people who sponsored it, namely the Anglo-Americans. And so they wanted to make sure they could keep controlling the Germans. And what do? They launched the Green Movement to attack in an irrational way the scientific and technological and classical culture that allowed Germany to get back on its feet after World War II. So in a sense, are you familiar with the story about Harlow's monkeys from the University of Wisconsin?
No.
Harlow was a behavioral researcher, and he had these monkeys that some of them were pampered and fed well, but tormented. And they ran them through all kinds of experiments. And when I was a kid living in Wisconsin, one night, these monkeys somehow broke out of the laboratory, and they were all over the city of Madison attacking people from the trees. And the Harlow monkey syndrome is, what happens when you torment a being for too long. And I think what we're going to see in Germany is an explosion. Now, hopefully it will be a nonviolent explosion toward a return to the better principles of the post-World War II period. But this is where you see the problem of the irrationality of the Frankfurt School introducing the principles of the rock, sex, drug counterculture, the idea that life is about immediate pleasure, whether it's sexual or an escape through drugs. They're now legalizing drugs in Germany. The youth, the Germans are complaining that the old habits of industriousness and Pünktlichkeit, being on time, these are gone. And the young generation doesn't have it. And so what are they doing? They're bringing in immigrants from Syria, Afghanistan, Kenya. And this is causing an explosion. So, we're back in a moment of profound tension. And the question is, are there any statesmen who can direct it in a proper way? And I would say that the way it should be directed is, and we're seeing some of this from German businesses, they want to trade with China. They want to trade with Russia. They like the idea that Germany and Russia should be historic allies. And that's what the British don't want. That's what the Ukraine war is about. That's what the push of NATO to the doorstep of Russia is about. And the question is, can you get the German people to figure that out? And I think, look, the Germans are pretty smart people as a whole, but they've been through an incredible amount of brainwashing. And now you have the emergence of these two political parties, supposedly left and right, who have the right idea about one thing. We need better relations with Russia and China. We need the return to science and technology, but they're at each other's throats. And the German government is saying the Alternative for Deutschland is a Nazi revival party, and the Sarah-Wagenknecht-Bündnis is a return of the Soviet policy, and so on. It's manipulation. And the question is, how long can people tolerate manipulation while they're seeing their standard of living collapse? And I think the war drive is adding to that, because we're seeing the collapse of living standards, the collapse of infrastructure, the degradation of the education system here in Germany. So, people should listen up. People should get wise. Look at what was done. John, the one institution that most people don't know about that allowed for the German economic miracle was the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, which was the credit bank for development. It was a Hamiltonian bank, and it made sure that credit went to entrepreneurs and industrialists who used that credit to increase the total wealth available to the society by increasing the productivity of the workforce, which means better standard of living, better housing, better education, and so on. That's how Germany emerged as one of the economic superpowers in the world. And that's how it was then attacked by the Green Revolution and the idea that Germany is authoritarian, that German nationalism is Nazi. And you can see the victims when you just walk down the street. The Germans as a whole are not very happy unless they're cheering for Bayern München, the football team, and drinking lots of beer. It's not a healthy culture anymore.
Yeah, and it's been shaped that way, I think. I would just put a few footnotes into what you said. Is my study indicates that Adenauer was cooperating with Allen Dulles, and the whole idea was to restore the money that Dulles' clients had invested in Germany, and then the people that were given this credit, how many of them were Nazis? Is Porsche in on this?
Well, you have a problem, John, when you have a country that was run by the Nazis, and the people who survived and profited were the people who worked with the Nazis. Not every one of them were Nazis. Some of them were competent engineers and corporate managers, and On Adenauer was mixed. The Adenauer, remember, he was, I think, 82 years old when he took over as chancellor. He had been the mayor of Frankfurt, I believe, or Cologne. He was a manager. But it was Ludwig Erhard who actually was the one who ran the credit policy. And you had a group of people who studied what Bismarck had done. Now, look, you go back to Bismarck, here's a totally mixed character. On the one hand, he was the champion of the Prussian Junker class, the military class, the land barons. But at a certain point, he realized Germany was being destroyed by the free trade policy of the British, dumping cheap steel into Germany from Britain and cheap grain into Germany from Russia. So Bismarck had a couple of people study the American system after 1876, the centennial celebration. And they came back and they said, look, we're doing it wrong. We need to have tariff policies to protect our industry, not to punish other countries, but to make sure they can't destroy our nascent industries by cheap goods. Secondly, credit policy guaranteed by the government, not by private banks, because the private banks are in it for their own benefit. And then on top of that, a social harmony policy, which does give better wages and recognizes the dignity of the working man. So he outflanked the socialists, Bismarck did. And this led to an incredible spurt of growth in Germany that was soon copied by the French, the Russians, the Japanese, the Chinese, everyone. And this is what terrified the British at the turn of the 20th century. That's what led to Mackinder's geopolitics. You can't let these ideas out of the bag. You can't have corridors of development connecting Germans with Chinese, with Arabs. You have to have a separation based on the clash of civilizations. And that's how the British did it. So what I'm saying is that Adenauer did collaborate with Dulles, but what was his alternative? Who else was there that could guarantee?
Who put Adenauer in power after the war anyway?
Yeah.
Who's collaborating with who? I think Adenauer was more of a puppet of the Western elites than somebody calling the shots. That's just.
But even so, he did have the good sense to hand to Ludwig Erhard the economic policy. And Erhard, after Adenauer stepped aside, Erhard became the chancellor briefly, and they ran a Watergate operation against him and got him out.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of those melted down gold teeth somewhere. And, I'll tell you, the story's never going to be told in its entirety, but I'm glad to see that there was at least some good in the Marshall Plan to increase the standard of living of people, even at the cost of having to, do business with the Nazis.
Well, the Credit-Anstalt policy is not so different from what China is doing, what China did to build up a middle class in China. It's not so different from what Russia is doing. Now, because of the war, too much of the Russian investment is going into the military. But the current head of the Russian defense, the defense chief, is an economist. He's not a military man. And he's basically saying, well, we can use this development to shift after these wars, once we get peace, to shift toward high-tech capital investment. And that instead of building bombs and missiles, we can build tractors and high-speed trains and things of that sort. So, the lessons have been learned by some people. That's how Russia is able to survive the sanctions. Whereas Germany, what's the lesson in Germany? Well, if you can't exploit the German worker, go to the United States or go to China. And that's where German industry is moving now.
Not to the United States.
Yeah.
Really?
Parts of the United States, yeah.
Oh.
Because the wages in the United States are lower than Germany.
Oh my, yes.
I mean, places like Tennessee and Alabama, and this is where Hearst and Volkswagen is probably going to move out of Germany soon.
Mm-hmm.
They're shutting down the first major Volkswagen plant, I think in 80 something years, was just shut down.
Well, to me, just to try to put my arms around a big part of this mess is, if we look at Toto's angry about this, but so calm down, Toto. The creation of a runaway ally, a breakaway ally, by whoever, the deep state, the financial powers that be, to create a population of people that believe in a religious way that they are completely entitled not only to all of the land that is mentioned in the Bible as being given to them by Yahweh, to and I won't get into split hairs as to exactly what tribe was given that and why anybody today claims to descend from them, but that's the theory, and these people buy it to the point that they are willing to commit the genocide that's going on in Gaza right now, to the point that they are willing to continue to believe that they are the chosen people to actually rule the world.
Yeah.
This is a poisonous doctrine that was created, if I understand our work together, by British intelligence in order to have a powerful ally in the Middle East, or as you call it now, the Southwest Asia. And the idea that they are now still functioning like that, they have the attitude of, and Netanyahu personifies it so well, of a junkyard dog that's been set loose to just take over things. And it is connected, in my mind, to Anthony Blinken, and to the Ukraine war, and the whole.
Zelensky's the same thing.
Okay, so
Zelensky. If you look at Zelensky at the UN, he's doing a shakedown tour, and it's the same. Ukraine doesn't have as powerful a military as Israel, but that's what he wants. But let me give you an example, an earlier example of a breakaway ally, Adolf Hitler. There was no intention initially that Hitler would be a long-term leader of Germany. The British and American trusts supported Hitler because they wanted him to destroy the Union movement, which he did, and they wanted him to turn against Russia. They wanted him to go east. And the idea was that they would then support him. Oops, did we lose you, John?
Sorry, we lost our internet for a second, but we're back.
Okay. So that Hitler was deployed on behalf of these British interests to prevent a Russia-Germany alliance, which was an effort made after the Treaty of Versailles, after World War I. Walter Rathenau at the Rapallo signed a deal that Germany and Russia would, and that was with Soviet Russia, that they would work together so that German industry would have access to Russian raw materials, and the Russians would have, in return, elements of German industry brought to Russia. So this was, Rathenau was assassinated. And we had the Weimar period of hyperinflation. We had the street fights between Nazis and communists. And out of this, the decision was made to put in a strongman, who in a sense was a breakaway ally. And the problem you always have with a breakaway ally is they start to believe they're God. And Hitler thought he could fight both East and West. He could conquer France and Britain and conquer Russia, Soviet Union.
Well, I think he figured out the British game, he figured out the British game, and so he knew that he couldn't just attack Russia without expecting to get rolled up from behind as soon as he took Russia down for them. From France in Italy. So that's why he had to go to Germany. I mean, to Britain and France first.
Well, he probably also had some insight from his finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht, who was essentially put into power by Montague Norman, the head of the Bank of England. Because Norman thought if you had fascist austerity in Germany, then you could end up eventually collecting the debt from World War I. So they wanted a slave labor economy in Germany to enable the British to collect the debt, and that was Schacht's role. And Schacht, contrary to what the revisionists say after the war, because Schacht was brought to trial at Nuremberg, and he was one of the few people acquitted. But it was Schacht who masterminded the concentration camp labor theory, which is if you can get people to work for 800 calories a day, then that's super profits. And if they eventually die, well, you just bring more people in. That was Schacht's policy. He was a monster. And he's lionized today as the guy who ended the Weimar hyperinflation. And all he did was destroy the German economy by raising interest rates to the roof, what we've just seen happen in the West, the Schachtian policy.
Yeah, and how far is it going to go here in the United States? So who can grab a hold of the collar of the junkyard dog and put him back in his doghouse to sit and learn stuff? Can anybody rein in Netanyahu, or I guess anybody could if they had the will to do it? People like BlackRock and the great financial powers. How about Dick Cheney? And I do want to ask your opinion, because I've started to think that Dick Cheney is essentially still running this the continuation of government routine that he installed in after 9/11, and pretending that he's still running the show.
I mean, the continuity of government and the
Yeah, continuity of government in 9/11, and when he just kind of took over the government when they put George W. on a plane and sent him to a military base to chill out.
The brains in the family is his wife. I think it's Lynn Cheney, and she was a product of the University of Chicago and the Straussians, Leo Strauss. Mm-hmm. Who was one of the jurists of the Nazi theory of the power of the state, the Notverordnung, the emergency powers the state has a right to grab when there's a threat. And, he's just a thug, but he's in there because he's a useful thug. And they used him, but he's directed by his wife. Now they
have a daughter named Lynn, right?
Liz. I think the daughter is Liz.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not sure whether Lynn is his wife or Lynn is his daughter.
I
hope he knows the difference.
Okay.
But in any case, what Cheney represents is a continuity to the power of the oligarchy. In a sense, Cheney had connections to Schlumberger, which we mentioned earlier. Halliburton. They put him in charge of Halliburton, which was one of the leading oil companies and energy companies in the world. Cheney was the one who pushed through the deregulation bills, which destroyed much of the utility companies and the power industry in the United States. Now, he was supposedly pro-oil, pro-old school energy, but his policies benefited the Greens by making electricity so expensive. You could now justify subsidies for solar and wind. So, this is where you see the free market deployed to destroy the physical economy. And that's what Dick Cheney is a master of, that and just pure thuggery. But then look, who was making the military policy? Rumsfeld was working with Felix Rohatyn from Lazard Frere.
I knew we'd get to him.
Yeah, and Schwarzenegger was part of that, and Michael Bloomberg. Bloomberg with Rohatyn were the ones who came up with the idea of the revolution in military affairs. And they used as a model Samuel Huntington's book, The Soldier and the State. And who was Huntington? A buddy of Kissinger from the William Yandell Elliott School at Harvard. So it's the same gang. And, one interesting aspect is as you go through generation after generation, the gene pool weakens and you get dumber people like Blinken. Blinken just got caught. I don't know if you followed this. ProPublica did a story. I sent you my article for this week that covers this. Blinken had a report done by the Agency for International Development, which is run now by Samantha Power, who's a real witch. But the agency had some serious people looking into human rights, and they put out a report. They were tasked to do a report on, is Israel disrupting humanitarian aid? And they said, yes, absolutely. And they documented thoroughly. So, and they gave that to Blinken. So Blinken is supposed to present the results of their investigation at a congressional committee. And what did he say? He said, it's our assessment that Israel is not blocking humanitarian aid. Now, why did he have to say that? Because if the assessment had concluded that Israel was, then we would have to stop providing funds to Israel. So Blinken lied and people died. And that's who Blinken is. And just as his mentor, Madeleine Albright, said, it was worth it for 500,000 Iraqi children to die because of sanctions, because of the effect it had on Saddam Hussein and bringing him down. Blinken's view is it's worth it to have 2 million Palestinians displaced, 45,000 or so killed, a war now breaking out in Lebanon. Why? To cement the power of the old establishment, the unipolar order, and to unleash thugs like Netanyahu. And that's the crisis we face now.
All right, we got time for one more thing, and this is my Elon Musk question. About 2 weeks ago, I was reading some of the old Executive Intelligence Review articles, and this one was by Gerald Rose. And what I wanted to remember from it is this, that he stated that when William of Orange was invited to come into England and take over the crown of England,
the Glorious Revolution,
he famously said, "I will not be a doge," a doge, which referred to the Venetian government model of government, in which there is a figurehead at the top that has a lot of ceremonial power and in pomp and circumstance, but in fact there's an oligarchy that runs things behind the throne. And William of Orange is saying, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to really run things, right? I'm going to be in charge. Well, it didn't work out for William very long, but the point is that this idea of being a doge resonated with me when I saw a picture from Elon Musk's campaign in which he has the letters DOGE in big letters in front of him as he's sitting at a desk and saying Director of Government Efficiency. And he's going to be the new Doge. And I'm thinking that's perfect, because that's exactly what we're looking at, is somebody that's going to deregulate everything. He's going to get rid of all the regulations, but of course, it's all going to be tailored to the needs of people that are behind Elon Musk in the first place, and his Dogecoin is probably going to come back. The little dog that's on it, and they're really advertising that too as part of the presidential campaign, that they're going to have Doge now back in government. Yeah. So your thoughts on Elon Musk before we have to wrap it up?
Well, that's a complicated question, because there's what you'd have to look at is who facilitated his rise. And I haven't been able to look into that yet. You know, if you look at people like Bezos and the other billionaires, the Silicon Valley, you find that there were elements in government that made them successful. And that included DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Planning Agency.
Yeah.
I haven't had the time or
Okay.
haven't had colleagues who have looked into Musk yet, but he combines the ideal aura of power on the one side, the richest man in the world and everything he touches turns to gold, with this idea of the technotronic society, that the technicians are the ones who should be running things. So it's something we should take a look at, because I think if Trump gets in, Musk is going to be playing a big role. And, as much as people are fascinated by him, I don't think people realize the potential pitfalls of giving that kind of power to one person.
All right. Well, we'll save Elon for another time, Harley. That's that's my thinking. Is we've got to start looking at who he is, and gosh, the power that he has with these satellites, and then of course Neuralink, and we're all
Yeah.
going to be heading into that singularity, that they all talk about the technological wonderful future, or the technological prison for
Yeah,
eternity. One or the other. We don't know which it is yet.
that's right. All right, John, always a pleasure.
All right. Same here, Harley. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for being with us. And I will see you guys on Thursday with David Cranmer Underdown. So we'll see you then. Bye now.